Good afternoon. My name is Ashley Eller. I work for the Apopka Police Department. I've been there for 7 years, and currently I work patrol midnights. Though I have several specialties, that's where I choose to be. That's where all the good calls are. That's where the best time is to go out and catch drunk drivers. And I'm a traffic homicide reconstructionist and also a drug recognition expert. Prior to the time that I came to the Apopka Police Department, I worked for OPD, and I was a civilian officer. I'm sure many of you in this room know that means that I basically humped crashes all day long from sunup to sundown. So I have a passion for this. This is what I love to do. What I'm going to talk to you about today is one case. One case that I worked almost a year ago, at the end of this month. And all the evidence that I collected and the things that I was looking for in this scene. And hopefully this won't be too far left field. So when we arrive on scenes as a traffic homicide investigator, what I'm looking for is where my vehicles are parked. Who's parked on top of my evidence? What evidence am I looking for? How big is the scene that I'm actually taking a look at? In this case, DOT rolled up down the 429 and they were flagged down by a passerby who was stopped. There's a vehicle parked on the shoulder of the road and people walking around everywhere. Where the DOT vehicle is parked in this picture, it's the white car with the blue lights, precluded me from seeing some of the evidence that I was looking for upon my initial response. We all know that when something hits something else at 60 miles per hour, the items that are hit are still traveling at 60 miles per hour, meaning that they can go up a long way before coming to a final stop. Also, if you respond to one of these scenes and there are witnesses there, please don't let them leave before we get there. These people can give us information that can take us down roads that we didn't even know existed. This is a view of the northbound lanes of my scene on the 429. So you can see there's a median there, and then in the other picture is a closer picture. The circle is around my clipboard. When I get on scene, the first thing I like to do is walk it. This scene turned out to be about the distance of a football field. We ended up having to move our laser mapping program twice to make sure that we captured everything that we needed. When I was walking the scene, it was before my crime scene got there, and the only thing I had was a clipboard. I walked down 71 feet and I found a piece of what I think is brain matter in the middle of the roadway. I had nothing else on me to document it. I dropped my clipboard. It's heavy enough, it's not going to blow away. It's indicating there's obviously something there, and it's telling everybody else that comes to the scene, hey, this might be important. I probably shouldn't move that. And I knew I'd be able to find it again, which is the most important part. So here's coming through the median in the northbound lanes. And then here's the other picture that I showed you, looking back at where the DOT car is parked. Okay, so this scene offered me a lot of things, one of which was grass. Everybody who sees these pictures, the first thing they always ask me is, where did the grass come from? I had no idea at the time. I'm like, oh, there's grass everywhere. So we had to dig through the grass piles to find a lot of the evidence that we did end up collecting. And this shot is of the northbound lanes on the 429 going towards the 414. And we were notified by people on scene that there was evidence to be found if only we would look. But nobody's really willing to tell us exactly what we're looking for. So there were no children involved in this crash, or not that I knew of at the time. And there was not a child in this seat. But this seat was harboring evidence that I didn't know existed. When the seat was flipped over, we found this Modelo can, which is still full. However, it has blood on it from what was inside the vehicle. And later I found out that when DOT arrived on scene, there's actually video footage of the passenger in this vehicle taking the child seat and intentionally dropping it over top of the beer can to preclude us from seeing it, at least while they were on scene. So my mind as a DUI officer is, man, somebody's impaired. So now I've got a complete divided attention. I need to investigate this traffic crash. I need to investigate this DUI. How do I do both at the same time? Both the driver of the vehicle who survived and the rear passenger who survived were transported to the hospital. So what I did was I sent one of my guys down there with a blood draw kit in hopes that they would be able to get blood from my driver that I could later use in prosecution of this case. It's evidence that is quickly dissipating. It's evidence that I need to get to post haste so I can ensure that I can build a proper case against this person. Though he told me he had 2 beers, no alcohol was identified in his system when his blood came back. Crash occurred at 22:01 hours, and his blood was collected at 23:25. No alcohol to be seen. And no evidence on scene or from any of the people that I spoke to that there was any sort of alcohol odor coming from the driver. During my investigation with the driver, both at scene, at the hospital, and in subsequent interviews, he admitted to me that he had used cannabis, Molly, and Xanax in addition to the alcohol. And I used all of this information and let FDLE know what I was looking for, because that's my evidence. It's not at-scene evidence per se, but it's evidence that I'm looking for in this case. So now that I had collected the blood, and now that I had taken a look at the scene, it was time for me to slow down and figure out how this happened. I did what every good investigator does, and I walked the path of the scene following the debris field, and this was the time I finally figured out where all the grass came from. The median. It had just been mowed, and when the vehicle rolled through it, it brought all the grass to the final rest points. The vehicle coming through the median left me some great furrow marks, and I followed them to the opposite side of the roadway to the southbound lanes of the 429. It's kind of hard to see, but if you look in the lanes right here, you can see the yaw marks coming through the travel lane and leading into the median. I walked them all the way back to where I could see the yaw marks finally started, where I discovered that the most likely cause was 2 vehicles in the lane. My driver swerves over, sees there's a car, yokes the wheel back, loses control of the vehicle through the median, rolls over, comes to final rest. And when I went back and looked in the northbound lanes, I became puzzled because I found some skid marks that led just past my decedent's body that was laying in the middle of the road. In looking at the vehicle, some of the things that we find most important is to figure out who was belted and who wasn't belted. Neither of the people in the backseat of this car were belted, and subsequently one of them did lose their life because of it. They were ejected from the vehicle in the rollover. But I did find out that the driver was belted because I took a look at his seatbelt. It's one of the things we use all the time, us and the fire department for sure. So when you're looking at a seatbelt that's been involved in a traffic crash, it's going to lock in the position that it was last used in if it's a significant crash. His seatbelt was locked all the way out and slacked, so I knew that it had most likely been on a human at the time that it impacted something else. The second picture to the right shows that the seatbelt is stressed because the seatbelt was still also moving 60 miles per hour. The occupant was moving 60 miles per hour, and the stress that he put on that seatbelt actually frayed and pulled those fabrics apart. These are things that we cut out of vehicles to pull DNA off of, just like our airbags that we send to FDLE. These are things that are important to us to use in these cases. The following couple slides I have are graphic, and less graphic now, still graphic. So the body in this case offered me a lot of evidence. Once we moved some of the grass and we actually took a better look at her, we could see the tire striations that went across her thighs and her feet. Upon looking at these closer, I could tell that they didn't come from the vehicle that she was traveling in, and it was incredibly unlikely that it would have actually rolled her over because it went in a completely different direction from her body. And looking at these marks, and then in taking another look at the skid marks that I had leading past her body, when I had the sick feeling that she had been hit by a vehicle that didn't stop. So now my investigation kicks into overdrive. I've got the guy whose vehicle she was traveling in. I know that there's a possibility he's impaired, but now I'm missing a driver who may have subsequently contributed to the ending of her life. I also couldn't identify her. This is what I was left with at roadside. We ran the tags on the vehicle, and they came back to a woman who could have been the person who was riding in the vehicle. And upon doing a more thorough investigation with the 2 gentlemen that were in the car with her, they could only give us one name, and it was a first name. In the city of Apopka, we're covering, almost 60 square miles at this point. How many people with that first name could there be? In doing our investigation, we found out she was a 16-year-old girl that went to our local high school. She had run away the day before. She was en route back home, and that's when the accident took place. To do the death notification, I had to go to the hospital, and I had to send another unit out to make the notification at the house because the family had already become aware because everything is posted everywhere nowadays, which made that incredibly difficult. So as my case progressed, we worked our hit and run aspect. We looked at the tire marks left in the roadway. We pulled all of the e-pass records from the 429. We followed 26 vehicle leads. We got in the car and drove to 26 different addresses to look at the undercarriage of the vehicles, to look at the tires of the vehicle, to look at everything we possibly could on that vehicle to find out where this person went. We did have several productive leads, but everything met with negative results. So our belief in this case, after we did our investigation of our e-pass records, which are vast, is that the vehicle was obviously smarter than us and turned around on the 429 and got off at an exit that didn't have any access to either cameras, e-pass, or any other documentation purposes. So our hit and run driver is still at large, despite all of our best efforts. Our conclusion in this case was that the state did decline to pick up charges, and the driver was not subsequently charged with driving without a license or any kind of DUI. But we learned a lot. We learned a lot about taking our time and doing things right. We put together a good case. We wrote good warrants. We did a good investigation. We worked closely with our e-pass people. We worked closely with our DOT people. We got the things that we needed to do the best investigation that we could, and we did the best job we could for the family. So we really are a family. It doesn't matter who we work for. Any of us out working on these roadways, we have to work together. That's what makes this possible. Thank you guys for what you do.
So as Cheryl mentioned, I am Shannon Trammell. I work for RIEGL. We are located just in Orlando, and we distribute laser sensors. I think before I start my introduction, I know we have a lot of engineers in the room, and it's important, while my presentation is targeted to traffic homicide investigations and the pilot project that we're currently doing, to note that our sensors are really great across a ton of applications for infrastructure and roadways and asset management and road quality cracks and things like that. So just to get into the meat of the presentation, as Officer Ashley, you saw from her presentation, there's several things that go on in a traffic homicide investigation. And there are many tasks that need to be completed on scene, one of which is documenting the scene with real-world measurements. So all of her debris that she had, the location of, this may be a little gruesome, but of that brain matter, all of that needs to be documented for her to do that 2D drawing that you saw. And just a little bit of background, some evolution of crash reconstruction technology. You know, they started with traditional methods in measuring, which were tape measures and roller wheels. You may see some areas with spray paint they're using to mark evidence or mark tire skids or where they believe skids have started. So those objects are then measured from a fixed location. You can see here it takes 2 to 3 people to do that. And you could imagine that rolling a tape measure with the windy Florida weather there, with the wind and you know how accurate those measurements really are. So we have moved on a little bit. Most agencies that I speak with are using this method of a total station, which provide, you know, slight more advancement in accuracy for those measurements than the roller wheels and tape measures do. But they do require a lengthy setup. They do have interferences from cell towers or even power poles. They require at least 2 investigators to operate with constant attention. So you'll see that lady there, she's looking through the sight line. What she's looking for is someone on the other end holding a prism, and that is measuring a distance for them to document that object is so far away. So what do they do with these measurements? As you saw in Ashley's presentation, this is a deliverable. Unfortunately, this is a pretty flat deliverable and some pretty flat evidence to use in court when talking about the loss of somebody's life that depicts what happened in this traffic crash. At the end of the day, this is one of the deliverables aside from their active investigation, whether it's pursuing, a hit and run suspect and other things. This is really, at the end of the day, what it comes down to. So law enforcement will spend hours on the scene just collecting these measurements to recreate this basic 2D line drawing. These hours just to create measurements, to document the measurements, don't take into account all of the other witness statements and investigative techniques that they need to do, with witnesses and pursuing other avenues. But there is a better way. Our whole goal with RIEGL is to provide simple, easy, accurate tools to collect and document these scenes very fast and effectively with millimeter accuracy. Our goal is ultimately to open those roads as quickly as we can. So all of the skid marks, all of the debris, everything is collected. It's frozen in time. We do this by combining high speed and hot and long range accuracy with up to about 500,000 points per second. As opposed to traditional methods I've seen from some of the troopers at about 100 points an hour with their total station. So here, this picture here, I can see here with the instrument actually uses light beam and a rotating mirror that spins. We know the speed of light, and that's how when we send the pulse is timed when it's sent out, and we know the speed of light, so we're able to determine when the pulse comes back, the distance of the object that was collected. It can be triggered by a single touch. It can be triggered remotely from inside a vehicle. It requires only one person to operate and set up, and I know that everyone says it's user friendly, but literally you push the start button and it starts to spin. So basically what we're doing is static scanning provides the ability for law enforcement to freeze that scene in time. The basic principle of using LiDAR for traffic homicide investigations or larger, maybe more severe scenes, traffic crashes, is to create this 3D point cloud, and it allows them to use, it's a tool, it's an aid for them to document and investigate their scene thoroughly out of moving traffic, off of the roadway, and really take their time with the investigation, and instead of having to have the roadways shut down for hours on end to continue to do these measurements and such on scene. So over the years, we have gained some pretty reputable law enforcement agencies, such as the FBI, Secret Service, and the Army Crime Lab. Recently, as Cheryl mentioned, we have entered into a pilot project with the Florida Highway Patrol Troop D here in Orlando, covering 3 counties, and CFX, Metroplan, and District 5 purchased this piece of equipment for them to use in a pilot trial. And we're very excited to be participating with them. I've worked very closely with all of the investigators and the corporals there in the office, and I thought that, I hope that the sound will be okay. If not, I'll just kind of explain through the video what's going on. But back in January, we had the opportunity to be featured with what the troop is doing and the pilot project that they're involved in on News 13. So I hope here that it will play.
It's going to be a benefit to the motorists here in Central Florida, as we don't have to keep the roads shut down as long as we normally do.
It was born out of an idea to get crash scenes cleared faster by using new technology. News 13's Julie Gargata has an exclusive look at a collaborative pilot program revolutionizing how local law enforcement agencies investigate crashes.
At FHP's Orlando headquarters, this is where homicide crash investigators do their work. After they do it here, the old school way, hand walk through a scene with photos and measurements. And now, A new device is changing things.
We've already used about 25 to 30 cases.
Sergeant Kim Montez says when asked in October to be part of a pilot study, they jumped at the chance.
We are glad that we've been given the opportunity to try this out.
A 3D laser scanner that slashes the time troopers need to do their work nearly in half. CFX, FDOT, and Metro Plan paid for the RIEGL in thirds, and right now,
there is only one. It's a very expensive piece of equipment.
it costs around $100,000.
Today we set up a mock crash scene for you.
RIEGL's Shannon Trammell gave us a demo complete with vehicles, debris, and a mock body covered up.
It's a one-person setup, about 20 pounds or so. There's a quick start button here.
It starts spinning 360 degrees, collecting raw data up to 500,000 points per second using laser and light. 45 seconds later, it's done. Ready to be moved elsewhere in the scene.
Then we would start another position.
6 to 10 times.
It kind of creates a panorama image back in our software,
Heading into the training room,
where I'll show you the data that we collected from the scene outside. So we can kind of maneuver ourselves through the scene.
picking up points the naked eye can't see, from where skid marks begin to blood.
It allows so much more than just a simple 2D drawing.
Trammell trained FHP troopers.
They got outside with the equipment. We were like, all right, now's your turn to do it. We're not helping.
But soon they got the hang of it. Now the second agency in the entire country to use it. Sergeant Montez says it's a game changer for them.
It's helping us do our job. Our homicide investigators are thrilled to be having this piece of equipment to use in their investigation.
In Orange County, Julie Gargata, News 13.
Money has been approved for the Orlando Police Department to buy a second unit by a competing manufacturer named Leica. They'll start using it in March. By July, when the pilot program ends, they'll make recommendations for which works better and whether they can afford to buy more.
So as you saw there, you saw it spin. Basically, the principle of operation, while this isn't a crash scene, this will kind of give you the idea. So upon arriving on scene, they would do an initial walkthrough and determine, where they believe that the scene, has started, where some of their evidence is, and that would determine their scan positions. They would move about their scene, such we're moving here. The instrument is spinning 360 degrees, 45 seconds for the laser scan, about another minute for the photograph. So we're looking at just under 2 minutes per scan position. And they can literally scan each position under 2 minutes. And most crashes that I've seen from working with the troopers, they're anywhere from 10 to 12 scan positions. So we're looking at roughly under 40 minutes, about 45 minutes or so to scan a scene. Okay, so once the data is collected, it's then processed. Quite simply, the raw data is brought into the computer and you push a button that says register. And all of these scan positions shown in each individual color there are registered together using algorithms way above my head to make sure that it is geo-referenced and correctly, that everything is registered correctly together. So measurements are taken within the LiDAR data to then create that 2D drawing that you saw. So on scene, in the initial start of the pilot with the total station that they were using, they were collecting anywhere from 200 to 400 points, which came to about 2 to 4 hours of just measuring time. We had about, 45 minutes on scene, and in about 10 minutes, they're able to pick those same 200 points that would have taken them with the total station in this scene. And they're using the same workflow, exporting their XYZ coordinates, importing into Crash Zone, and Crash Zone is automatically drawing that 2D line drawing for them. So drastically cutting down on-scene time by a lot, anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. So what does this really look like? I know it's really hard to see on the projectors. If you can, try to look at the TV screens a little bit. It's a little clearer. This is a bird's eye view of 3D data. This is not a photograph. This is a crash scene. This is actually out in San Diego, but I'll have some more here from Troop D in just a minute. So that's in true color. Here's the detail that's collected. Now that this is not a close-up scan of the car, this is simply we're moving about the scene just in a circle to get coverage from all angles. This is shown in reflectance. Reflectance is a distinguishing factor of our instrument in which the data can be viewed in that true color or collected from the attributes that the point hits. So we're not just measuring distance, we're actually capturing the reflectivity of the surface that laser hits as well. And that's how we're able to determine, to pick up skid marks in our data. Daters can view in reflectance to determine, where the initial lane departure took place, at what point the vehicle lost control, when the brakes were applied from those skid marks. So LiDAR gives us the ability to quickly and accurately collect the scene with an average of savings of 1 to and upwards of 3 hours. And using LiDAR, you're basically freezing the scene in time in a 3D virtual environment, giving the investigator the ability to perform their detailed investigation measurements. I mean, there is a lot of math that goes into this for them, and to really take the time to accurately do that back at the station. So while the results of the pilot project with CFX, Metroplan, and FDOT are currently being compiled, I think we'll have our first set of numbers come July. I couldn't share this presentation without just mentioning that the longer that the roadways stay closed, the greater the economic impact in dollars that is to the surrounding areas, not just to the toll agencies, but to other businesses in the area. Of course, we've talked about secondary crashes. Drivers like myself on the road see, the sign notification of a long delay, and I certainly am guilty of looking for a way out, and usually diverted on roads that I'm not familiar with, that are not able to handle this capacity of people looking for, alternate routes. So, and I just mentioned there, so the 400i, we've got about 30 to 45 minutes compared to their 2 to 5 hours, 2 to 4 hours. So here's some data examples. This is true color road markings. It's pretty similar to what you would see from a photograph. If we switch to the very important reflectance view, you can now really see those skid marks. You can also tell that there was an arrow there that looks like it was painted over, and I have them side by side here so that you can see the difference. Also, this does not pertain to roadways at all, but very helpful in crime scene investigations with blood splatter or the covering up of blood splatter, moving back to roadways and hit and runs, detecting bondo from vehicles that may have been repaired after a hit and run. That reflectance is really key. That attribute is really key in determining the difference in surfaces, and that bondo will, even with paint over it, will reflect differently than the original body of a manufactured vehicle. Again, just some overview bird's eye examples. Maybe a little hard to tell with it being a little bit small from there. This is a vehicle. If I look at it, it's a little bit difficult. I can see a spill or a mess or something to the right side of that vehicle, but I'm not certain what it is. If I switch to reflectance, I can clearly tell that that's a motorcycle. Here's some data examples from Troop D. Here you can really tell the level of detail, and again, this looks like have scanned right on top of this vehicle. In actuality, the scan positions are much farther away from here, but I've just zoomed in. So if you're not familiar with working in a virtual environment, it's similar to being in a video game, and when you zoom, you're really moving through the scene as if you were at the scene. This is from that same scene. And actually, the driver of this tractor trailer truck was the one that lost his life, and not the other guy. So the crash scene can then be revisited and viewed from any vantage point. This is really helpful for scene interrogation and sight lines and obstructions. And we come to talk to DOTs and road maintenance companies. We can really tell if you know, there was a stop sign there, if there was a tree blocking that stop sign, we can really put ourselves back as if we were the driver of that vehicle, and we can recreate what happened. We're able to do some reconstruction, put the vehicles back upon impact. We don't have to do any other scanning. We're just scanning that scene 360 degrees at that scene, and we're able to, you know, use the vehicles that are there, crushed, position them back together. Okay, so crashes don't always happen in the most ideal situations. Ashley said she's, you know, she likes the night shift because that's where everything happens. And we live in Florida, so lots of rain. Our sensor is safe from the elements. Water does have a reflectivity value, so of course we are going to pick up that rain. Back in the software, we are very easily able to filter, select, I mean literally push a button, and it selects all of the rain, and then we just remove the rain, and the data that was behind the rain that you intended to collect is still there. So just to wrap up, just a couple of things. Our goal is to provide technology-driven tools to become more efficient in clearing the roadways. This provides increased safety to law enforcement. They don't have to keep the road closed to perform their investigation on scene. Rather, they can collect the scene, freeze it in time, and do, you know, a lot of their investigation back in the station and out of the roadway. Again, the VZ400i operates in a variety of weather: snow, very cold, very hot. And, you know, our ultimate goal is to not only provide safety to the law enforcement officers, but to extend commuter experiences on the roadways. So I said I'm happy to pay my toll as long as everything's going smoothly, but the minute I'm, you know, trying to, a sign tells me that I'm going to be in a long delay, I definitely am looking for an alternate route. So promoting quicker road reopenings is the best way to minimize economic impact on the area that they play, and those looking for another route on unknown roads less equipped to handle the heavier traffic. I'd also just like to mention that we're able, from those screenshots that you saw, to provide so much more detail than just a 2D flat line drawing for if the case would go to court for court purposes. I believe that the scan data is more impactful and gives a jury a real depiction of the crash and the severity of what would happen than any 2D line drawing would ever do. All right, well, thank you so much.